Willkommen in einem anderen video, or welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case part 17 of my battle series. In this case I'm covering the Battle of Austerlitz, which occurred on the 2nd December 1805. As in all my battle series, this is not designed as a specific historical video. It's designed to assist players in creating scenarios of the battle. As a result, my emphasis is on the units and what they did in the battle rather than any in-depth analysis of why General X did whatever he was supposed to have done or not done. In order to make this useful for figure gamers, I need to know the location of the major formations at each significant point in the battle, which could be even per hour. One issue I have of written accounts of any battle is that they do not give you a good view of all the events occurring at a single point in time, instead focusing on one part of the campaign and then when they complete that going back into time and going to another part of the campaign. As a result, maps, formations and times are all critical, and getting the data is sometimes more difficult than I would have normally expected, unless of course you're dealing with a very well researched battle such as Waterloo. The main map I'll be using is basically this map. This shows the position just before midnight on the 1st of December at 1800 hours. You can see the Allied movement towards the French. For whatever reason, the Allies had decided to engage with the French. If the Allies had won, it would have been remembered as a brilliant move, but as they lost, it was regarded as a foolish move. This is common in battle accounts. This comes from the West Point Atlas and is an older version of the previous map you saw. I found it interesting that according to this, the Allies moved through the boggy terrain on their left flank. I suppose the dotted lines don't actually reflect their exact movements, and they probably, or almost certainly, followed roads. Now, while researching this, I discovered this site, and I cannot recommend it more. This shows a slide from an animation on this site of the Art of Battles. The link will be in the comments of this video or at the rear of this video. This animation, which is a PowerPoint file, is very good, and I would advise anyone interested to view it. It is a superior view of the progression of the battle to my video, for example, and I wish it was in a video form with a voiceover. This clearly shows the French right flank was weak and the left was strong. The Allied had the opposite disposition. This map comes from Chandler's excellent book. This shows the French and Allied respective plans. If the Allies had held in the centre, they could have possibly pulled it off. But they most certainly did not, and I suspect if there was even a chance of this, Napoleon wouldn't have done what he did. This shows the two main phases of the battle on the 2nd December. The Allied attack on the left, which includes the French response, and the French counterattack on the right, and final Allied collapse. As in my example, I used the maps to create a playing area. I need to know the terrain features, and this is a contemporary map of the Austerlitz area, which I did refer to. Along the same lines, this shows a French comparatively contemporary map containing additional details of the later stage of the battle. Using a variety of different maps, this is the map I'll be using for this video. The Allies are at the top and the French at the bottom. This, incidentally, is the template I use to create my playing areas for figure gaming. The map or template is specifically designed for at a scale of 1 in 8,000, and the playing area is 6 feet wide by 3 feet deep, which is rather small, but I design it this way so both players can remain seated, and it works reasonably well. Let's now look at the opposing forces, specifically the major formations. When I first thought about going over the structure of the various armies, I ended up with a lot of slides showing the exact structure of the armies down to battalion, squadron and battery level. This is clearly overkill, so I simplified the TO&E for this video. My primary source was Nyhorster, but I did make a lot of changes based on other sources and references. There was a lot of unit swapping occurring, more than most other battles, and the TO&E did depend on when it was supposed to be, at the time of the formation. If anyone is interested in the detailed analysis, you can find it in my Napoleon TO&E white paper on my Kriegsspiel.io group site. At the highest level, this shows us the French army at, let's say, corps level. Instead of using commanders' names, I will identify the formation by their corps numbering, or in this case by specific types such as guards or the grenadier formation. I find that using commanders can be sometimes confusing in a video, especially if the commander is relatively unknown and my pronunciation is not really very good. This shows the additional breakdown to divisional level. I'm not including the divisions to any large extent on the map, as it ends up making it very hard to see anything, although in retrospect I probably should have considered doing this video using divisions rather than corps, because there was so much swapping that occurred during this battle. But anyway, this shows the Neuhauster structure of the French army, and it remains or is reasonably accurate compared to all the other sources I have. This shows the high-level Allied army. The Allies did not adopt the corps system. Instead, they used an ad hoc column system. I had an enormous amount of issues with the TO&E here, not because of lack of information, but because there were too many sources, many of which did not agree with each other. I have no idea if the version I've selected is correct, but I lack the ability to determine which is the correct version, and I'm hoping that I'm roughly correct. This shows the breakdown of the Allied army going down to brigade and divisional levels. As I indicated, I had major issues matching the formation shown on the maps that I use and the TO&E that I'm displaying here. I cannot vouch for its accuracy, but the level I'll be addressing the battle at, it probably shouldn't be a major issue. In order for me to try and pin down the locations, particularly of the Allied forces, in greater details, I was actually forced to rely on the deployment from an SPI board game called Austerlitz, which you can see here, and all the counters. Assuming the board game is reasonably correct, this matches up the TO&E as closely as I can with the SPI board game. Now, it does not match many of the maps that I showed earlier, so I really have no idea how accurate it is, but in order to actually try and pin down the most likely location of the Allied columns, this is the method that I had to use. I must admit, this is proving to be one of the hardest battles to cover in any of my video series. Now we'll get to the meat of the operation, which is moving into the actual battle. This was the position at 1800 hours on the 1st of December. Napoleon had evacuated the Pratzen Heights on the 30th of November. The Allies then decided to occupy this rather good defensive position, securing the position by the 1st of December, in this particular case at 1800 hours. This was the position at 06:30 hours on the 2nd of December. The day began with a thick fog which concealed the French move to their attack positions on the left and in the centre, which gave the French a big advantage. This was the position at 08:30 hours on the 2nd of December. The Allies had begun their attack earlier and they were fully into the attack by 08:30 hours. Now, at the same time, the French forces were moving up to reinforce their right flank, which is Friant's division, and on the left flank, Napoleon decided to delay a bit and then launched his attack at 0900 hours. This showed the position at 1000 hours on the 2nd of December. The Allied left flank was heavily engaged against the French Third Corps. The French Fourth Corps struck the Allied Fourth Column while it was moving to fill the gap between the Allies' left and centre. The effect of this on the Allied Fourth Column was a catastrophe. On the French left flank, the French Fifth and First Corps, along with the Cavalry Corps, were driving towards the heights. The Allies sent forces down to meet the French, but they were heavily outnumbered on this particular flank. This showed the position at 1100 hours on the 2nd of December. The Allied centre was collapsing, so the Russian Guard was sent in to stabilise the position. The French then were forced to send their Guard cavalry in to deal with this particular threat, as the Russian Guard had achieved some early successes in stabilising. This showed the position at 1300 hours on the 2nd of December. The Allied right flank was collapsing, and the French Fourth Corps pivoted right to support the French Third Corps, which was under severe pressure. At the same time, the Third Corps decided to launch their attacks in coordination with the Fourth Corps, which again proved comparatively devastating. This showed the position at 1400 hours on the 2nd of December. The Allied right flank was in full retreat and the Allied left flank was beginning to break, and most of it was already in full retreat. I found this battle difficult to reproduce at the level that I selected corps and column. I suspect it may have been better to show divisions instead of columns and corps. What I did find amazing is how quickly the Allies collapsed. The French attack on the left seemed to roll over the Allies with only a slight setback due to the Russian Guards' counterattack. This was obviously the key to the French victory. On the other hand, the Allied left flank had failed to roll over the French Third Corps in a similar manner. While it's true the French held good defensive positions, in good fortified positions and behind the stream, this cannot explain it fully. I would have expected the French Third Corps would have eventually collapsed, but the French Fourth Corps quickly stopped the Allied attack and caused the Allies to collapse instead. The French Fourth Corps attack against the Allied Fourth Column, while the Allied Fourth Column was moving, was also a critical factor. I can't help but believe the French troops were simply better, as well as possessing superior leadership, as we already know, in order to explain why they did so well. Let's quickly look at the rules. The battle is a rather large battle, so requires rules which can allow you to fight such a large battle. There are actually very few rules which allow you to do this, outside obviously of board gaming. The three sets of rules I normally recommend are Bloody Big Battles and Napoleonic Option. Actually, there's no real need to import any of the Napoleonic mods. The rules as they stand are perfectly capable of simulating Napoleonic battles. The Age of Eagles, which is quite a detailed, although this would require a very large playing area, and of course Napoleon at War, which is a figure game version of the SPI board game. Other rules you could consider are DBN and Blucher. However, these would reproduce the battle in a rather abstract manner. They are good for a game, but possibly not so good for reproducing a historical battle. Snappy Nappy also would fit into this category. The final options which have been recommended to me, although I've personally not tried them, are Volley and Bayonet and Marshal of the Empire. This is a difficult battle to reproduce without special rules or giving the French significant combat benefits over the Allies that would not, on the surface, be required, or you would think would be required. In simple terms, the French surprised the Allied with their attack against the centre. This is almost impossible to achieve in a board game or figure game unless you force the Allies to expose themselves to an attack in the centre. Then that would become a boring game. Basically, the only way to do this is in kind of a double-blind system, which is extremely difficult to achieve in figure gaming or board gaming. Now, if you do not force the Allies to basically lose the game by not exposing their centre and not preparing, then you need to see if there's some other way to determine to make the French win the game. We know the French First Corps in particular performed very well against what seemed like overwhelming Allied forces. You could actually make those troops a higher level. I suspect anyone creating the scenario would need to think long and hard about how to give the French additional benefits apart from, let's say, enhancing the Third Corps to veteran or something of that nature in order to allow them to achieve what they did historically. I also expect command control rules would need to be essential, as at several points the Allies seem to be milling around doing very little or not correctly reacting. The battle has a similar issue to Jena Austerlitz. The French opponents would never make such foolish moves, thus you never result in a game which duplicates history. I suspect Austerlitz could be in that particular bucket. This is one of the issues of historical scenarios. When one side did really stupid things or made major errors, you're never going to get the players to duplicate those errors. Thus, this completes part 19 of my battle video series, in this case covering the Battle of Austerlitz. This was the most difficult project that I undertook so far, which did surprise me. I thought it would be fairly simple. I'm having a lot of difficulty creating a scenario for this battle, so I almost certainly will have to resort to the system I used for Jena Austerlitz. Ignore what happened historically and work out what each side could do in a best case scenario and use those points or those best case points to determine victory or loss. Now with Jena Austerlitz, at least in that particular battle, the French were always going to win because they simply had more stuff. but at Austerlitz that was not the case. So, in conclusion, alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.